Good afternoon. My name is Brother Patrick Kindred, or good morning, depending on when you are watching this. So, good afternoon or good morning. I will be giving a brief presentation on the history of Grecian pottery. Now, in order to first talk about Grecian pottery, a major part we must discuss is the process of throwing or making your pot or vase. Now, there are four major parts of throwing your actual vase. The first part is the wedging of the clay. In your upper left picture on the page, there is a man wedging clay. Now, what wedging clay is the removal of voids or foreign bodies in your clay. So if there are air bubbles or things such as maybe sticks or hardened pieces of clay that have turned to rock, this is the process in which you use to remove them so you later on do not damage your piece as you're making it or hurt yourself by cutting your hand on rocks, which have happened before. So, how this process works of wedging the clay is that a person will, as you can see in the photo, force the clay down in a downward motion, and it will press the clay out so you can remove the air bubbles or the bodies or the foreign bodies out of your clay. And once this is properly been done, it will have a consistency throughout the clay which you may work with. Now, moving on to the second part of the process of throwing is centering the clay on the wheel. The way that this works, if you look at the upper right picture in the slide, you will see a person centering their clay. And how this works is that once you have properly wedged your clay and put it on the potter's wheel, the process of centering will be that you will set your arm either against your abdomen or your leg, depending if you're sitting or standing. And once the wheel begins moving, the clay will tend to be lopsided or turn more to one side. And what this process does is that it centers it in the middle of the potter's wheel so that you can properly work on a vase. Because if the clay is lopsided, then you cannot properly work on a piece. So this is what the picture in the upper right is demonstrating. Now, moving on to the third part, which is the throwing of the pot itself. Now, in the lower left picture demonstrates what a modern potter teacher is demonstrating. Now, however, while this is a modern photo, this is actually a demonstration of the ancient Greek method of throwing a pot. Now, what you may be asking is, wait, how is this turning? Because the potter's wheel must be turning in order for this to work. Well, in ancient Greek tradition, what happened is that the apprentice of the potter actually turned the wheel while the potter was working on the product. So as you can see, the man in the green shirt is working on the vase or the pot while one of the students is turning the wheel. Now, in modern times, this is very different because we have automated potter's wheels so that with a simple press of a pedal, we can easily turn the wheel by ourselves. Now, in the final fourth step of the process of throwing, we have the removing of the pot from the potter's wheel. The way this works is that in modern pottery, we may have a cutting wire we use where we will wetten the bottom of our product so that we can easily cut it off from the wheel. However, in ancient Greece, while they may have used twine or a similar small cutting object, it is also both not uncommon and common, depending on how you work, to have a large amount of clay on your potter's wheel. And once you have a product, to actually cut it off of on top of the clay and then work from the clay beneath. It just depends on how a potter works. Now, moving on to the second part, we have the firing process of pottery. Now, this is different from modern pottery, where if we use simple glazes, Can be a simple two-phase process. However, in ancient Greece or Grecian pottery, the pots underwent a very specific and crucial three-phase pottery, which involved an extra phase or special steps in which we do not utilize, depending on the art style. So in the first phase, or phase one, which is the oxidizing phase of this firing process, you have to, the point of this phase one, if you look at the bottom two pictures of the vases, or vases, depending on how you say it, the lower left is an example of a finished masterpiece of Grecian pottery. What phase one, the oxidizing phase, completed was having an oxygen-rich environment for the clay to have that bright orange color. And the way that this was achieved is that there's an iron concentration within the clay, so when it had that oxygen-rich environment, it would cause the clay or the vase to turn bright orange. Now, moving down to phase two, the reduction phase, if you look at that same piece I've been discussing, it has very dark black areas in the vase. And the way this is achieved is by a slip or a wet glaze, if you will, made of clay, which has, or when fired properly and seals itself onto the vase, will achieve that very dark black color. So you have that high contrast between orange and black. However, during phase two, the reduction phase, that bright orange we achieved in phase one will tend to darken, such as when the slip itself is properly sealing onto the vase. So that's where the important and crucial phase three, or the re-oxidizing phase, occurs. After that, oh, and I forgot to mention, the reduction phase involves very oxygen-free process. So if you look at the upper left picture of the kiln where it has the two openings, those will be sealed to where oxygen cannot get to the vase and it causes the blackening of the vase. And then, okay, so moving on to three, the re-oxidizing phases, those openings will be reopened so that the oxygen, or that the vase may now have the orange return to it. So where the slip is not, or the very dark black areas, if those are sealed properly, those stay black, and the parts without the slip will turn the bright orange again, and you have that proper contrast. However, if that slip does not properly seal or is not properly fired, you have problems which may occur where it may orange, such as in the picture to the right of the masterpiece, where if you look at the black bands created on the vase, while part of it is black, the other part is orange, where the oxidizing phase, or the re-oxidizing phase in step 3, caused it to orange again because it was not properly sealed. Now, in the upper right of the page, or the slide, these are major shapes that occurred or were of style in Grecian pottery. Now, Grecian pottery, while may also have been made for aesthetic appeal, Greeks usually made their pottery for daily uses, such as carrying water, holding wine, and even some smaller vases were actually used to carry perfume, which were small enough for women to carry on their necks. So these 6 figures you see in the upper right were major figures that were used in daily life. For example, the amphora you see in the upper left, which is the very tall vase, may have been used to carry wine or water, depending on who was using it and what they used it for. But just simple uses, or daily uses such as that. Another important part of Grecian pottery that can differ or relate to modern pottery, depending on the artist or the potter themselves, is that the painter of the vase and the potter were 2 separate people when ancient Greeks were making their pottery. So while a potter would make the vase, such as the 2 in the lower right, they would make the vase. However, they would then hand it off to a painter or someone to decorate the vase separately. Now, it is not uncommon for there to be duos or two people such as a potter and a painter to work in tandem or with each other during this process. And some have been recorded during ancient Greek times later on where they would sign the vases, which was actually not a common practice early on in Grecian pottery, where a lot of the pots were not actually signed by their creators and can only be identified now by their art styles, where scientists or observers of the art can look at how the pot was made and tell that there was a certain person that did these vases a specific way and say, oh, these were done by the same person. Now, moving on to the art periods of the ancient Greeks, there are three or 3.5 major areas that the Greeks went through with the influence of their Grecian pottery, or their pottery, Grecian pottery to us. So in ancient Greece, we have, or the first major influential period of Greek pottery is the geometric period, which from 1000 to 700 BCE, the pots or the vases were decorated with only geometric shapes, such as in the upper left photo, where you can see the vase is decorated with rectangular or triangular or circular designs, where it's very sharp and very pristine. One major design that vases had, or Grecian pottery was known for, was having very well drawn circles where they were not lopsided or lopsided. Can't really do much else with a circle, but they had very well or perfectly drawn circles. And one method for achieving this was actually having stiff thistle brushes that were attached to compasses, such as the thing in math where you have a point, it sticks down to an area, and then you have another pencil on the other side and it turns around. Well, this same method was used with brushes, where the Greeks would attach brushes and they would paint perfectly made circles onto the vases or the pots, which even in itself is very astonishing. Now, moving on to a second major period is in the Corinth region or city of Greece, between the 8th and 7th century BCE centuries. This, if you look at the upper right, is considered the orientalizing phase in Grecian pottery, where when commerce began to diversify and be extended out to various regions throughout the old world, where Greece was introduced to Asian commerce, influences in their art designs carried over into their pottery. So if you look at the upper right image, such as the lion head in the upper part of the vase, that was also, or one of the major artistic differences, where they actually incorporated animals in their designs in the pots and vases themselves. And lower down in the vase with the artistic styles, they add people and lorical characters and animals in the decoration of the vase. Now, for the third and one of the most influential parts in Grecian pottery, you have in Athens, which started in around the 6th century BCE. Now, there are two different parts in the 6th century that were influential areas in Grecian pottery. The first major occurrence was the black figure pottery, which is represented by the picture on the lower left. Now, this picture is similar to one we analyzed before in a previous slide, where we have that high contrast of orange and black accomplished by that three-phase pottery. Now, the black figures, as you can see, are silhouetted people that tell a story or represent something that happened during that time period. So in the lower left, you can see the several men that appear to be running. So that artist's intent, or the painter's intent, was to tell that story or to represent what had happened at that time. And this was achieved by using the slip and the painter's skill to create this scenario. And as you can see, a majority of the vase itself is covered in that black slip where there's not much else. And that was a major artistic um, preference in black figure pottery, where majority of the vase had the black slip on it, and then in a certain area of the vase or the pot, it would tell a story with that high orange and black contrast. Now, in that second half of that influential period in the 6th century BCE Athens, it was a transition from black figure pottery to red figure pottery, which is represented by the right, or the lower right picture, excuse me. And how this transitioned, as you can see, basically became the opposite method for the pottery. So instead of having that high contrast orange background and those black silhouetted figures, the figures themselves were the orange. And this was caused because the black lines which were able to be put into the figures allowed for far greater detail than black silhouettes. So painters themselves preferred to have orange or red figure pottery much over the black figure because of the greater detail and realism they could cause in their pieces of art. So as you can see in the lower right is one of the major ways that the vase was made. Now, while this has been transitioned to red figure pottery, it was still a preference for the vases to be majorly colored in the black slip. And this is the part of the presentation where I would have showed my actual model. So if you're watching this, hopefully you have my live model. Thank you. This concludes my presentation of the brief history of Grecian pottery. Thank you.